learner, belief, developer, achiever, and responsibility. I am Mark Whitacre. I'm the Executive Director of T-Factor, which is Transformation Factor at Coca-Cola Consolidated. And my biggest aha moment about learning about my strengths was about belief, about something that I probably had since I was born, but I learned how to really be intentional about that and to use belief in whole new, unique ways as I got older and more into leadership.
I'm Darren Verisami.
I'm Brandon Miller.
And this is the Strengths Whisperer,
The show empowering leaders to create, build, and sustain great places to work.
On this episode, we have Mark Whitacre. Welcome to the show, Mark.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Before we talk strengths, I want to explore how getting turned into the FBI by your wife that you're still married to put you on a path of purpose. Now, Mark, for the past couple of decades, you've truly been a model for purpose-driven leadership, and you embody what it means to be a servant leader. You've brought that framework to numerous companies, but that was not always the case for you, was it?
Absolutely, it was not the case. When I was age 25, I got a PhD in biochemistry from Cornell University, and I graduated when the whole biotech industry was exploding, just when Genentech was starting. And I grew up with the right moral compass, wonderful parents. I met my wife when she was in 7th grade and I was in 8th grade, went to our high school proms together. But somewhere when I graduated from an Ivy League school and the jobs were just amazing at that time, by the time I was 32, my base salary was, and this is 1989 when I was 32, and I'm 65 now, so it's 3 decades ago. But by the time I was 32, I was divisional president of the biotech division of the 56th largest company in America, ADM Archer Daniels Midland, 70 billion in revenue, 30,000 employees. Had my own jet given to me my first week, so I was there 8 years. I had my own Falcon 50. I bought the CEO's home, 13,000 square foot house with an 8-car garage, with horse riding stables. That was my first month. And it was like a life like Justin Bieber before Justin Bieber. And I really lost my way. Matter of fact, I just presented literally yesterday an event, and I titled the event when I speak at When Good Leaders Lose Their Way. I got caught up in power and greed, and they started mentoring me how to take over a large international cartel, a price fixing case that became the largest price fixing case in U.S. history. My wife became a Christian at 30. I was not a Christian at that time. And I started sharing with her about what was going on. And she was just so shocked, the massive fraud that it was, stealing hundreds of millions of dollars for almost 12 years in a row. And I was just being mentored and only involved about 7 months. And she said, Mark, you're going to turn yourself in and you're going to do it today.
So Mark, God bless our wives, right?
Absolutely. The miracle that mine stayed with me.
I'll tell you what, it sounds like she did you probably the greatest service of your life. And as you're telling your story, very curious, what happens next?
Well, I shared it with Ginger. She says, Mark, you've got to turn yourself in. She said, Mark, I'm really troubled by this. This is illegal. Here we live in a mansion, flying around on a jet. And after a couple of years of the company, they trusted me and started bringing me in like family. And they started sharing what they were doing because they're in their mid-70s and they had to groom someone younger to take over this international cartel, this price fixing scheme. And I was being groomed to do it. And I shared that with her. And she was just so troubled with the fraud that it was. And after she prayed about it, and after we argued about it for a couple of hours, she said, Mark, you're going to turn yourself in. You're going to do it today. So the next step, we're sitting with the FBI that day. A case that's been going on 12 years, a case that I'm involved with about 7 months. But the very day that my wife learned about it, she blew the whistle on that whole thing. And I tell you, the FBI couldn't believe it. And it became the largest price fixing case in U.S. history, $1 billion theft for 12 years in a row.
That is something else. Just to hear the journey, hear the ability for your wife to arrive at the conclusion that we're not going to continue this. And one of your top strengths is belief. You took the Strengths Finder in 2017, took it again just recently, and belief came up. And I would just wonder, as we talk about that one here in a few minutes, if that wasn't one of your wife's at that time also. Just that place of core values has to get ahead of advantage, has to be ahead of the consequence because that's what guides our decisions.
I would imagine that it was. And I'll tell you something. She told me even then that day, I said, Ginger, I could go to prison. This is breaking antitrust laws, federal laws. I said, the CEO is a billionaire. He's best friends with President Clinton. And I said, this guy is one of the most powerful men in the world. This is 1992. I said, this company could destroy us. 56th largest company in America. I'm more concerned about them than the breaking the antitrust laws. And she said, you know what, Mark, I'll stay with you if you go to prison. And she said, God will protect us, but we're going to do it and we're going to do the right thing. And we got to do this.
Now, Mark, you did end up on this journey going to prison. Your wife stayed with you, and something transformed in you because today you are an exemplary servant leader, and you go about and you share this story very openly and this journey of yours. Can you give us just a little insight into what that transformation was like for you and why that took place?
Yeah, basically, the amazing thing is I wore a wire 10 hours a day for 3 years. Longest duration anybody wear a wire. Every Monday through Friday, I was wired up at 6 in the morning by the FBI, wore a wire the entire day, met with them in evenings and gave debriefings and turned over the tapes. And I did that every day for 3 years, 1992 to 1995. And at the end, they gave me a 6-month plea agreement, a deal of a lifetime, a Martha Stewart sentence. Everybody else was going to go to prison for several years. I was getting 6 months. And all I had to do was sign this plea agreement. Ginger begged me to sign it. I looked at Ginger with my lawyer there, and I said, Ginger, it's your fault that I'm in this mess. I've had to wear a wire for 3 years because of you. I lost 60 pounds wearing a wire. It was the most pressure I ever had in my life. The FBI, when they wire me up, they say, Mark, if these guys get you, they're going to kill you. This is billions of dollars involved, and it's an international cartel. And said your life would be in danger. And you hear that every week, 2 or 3 times a week when you're being wired up. It takes a toll. And I was falling apart. I couldn't sleep at night. I was blowing the driveway off with gas leaf blower and thunderstorms at 3 a.m. So I told Ginger, I said, it's all her fault. I wasn't going to sign the 6-month sentence. I threw the plea agreement in her face. And then I fired the lawyer on the spot who recommended the plea agreement. And then I went to court and fought the case for 3 years to get 8.5 years instead. And I had a 6-month sentence right in my hand. And I threw that away because I was so mad at my wife at that point. And we look back now and we say, thank God I didn't sign that 6-month sentence. Because like my wife said, I would have came out the same greedy man that I went in with 6 months. Because some people reached out, a guy named Ian Howes, another one was Chuck Colson, reached out my second week in prison. He was White House counsel under President Nixon. And he went to prison for the Watergate scandal in the 70s. He became a Christian in prison. And he reached out to me, poured into my life, discipled me. And I became a Christian that first year when I was in prison, and it changed my life forever. Here I was earning $350,000 base salary, but with stock options and bonuses, I earned $3 million a year for 8 years in a row. Now I'm $20 a month for 8 years. And I became a Christian, helped these guys in prison get their GEDs. I helped some of the Spanish ones learn how to speak English and write English. And I helped some of them get 2-year degrees. And I tell you, at $20 a month, they became the most productive years of my life because the first time in my life, I'd helped somebody else besides myself. And I learned how rewarding it was when I became a Christian, being discipled by Ian Howes and Chuck Colson. I learned how rewarding it was to be a servant leader because I'd never experienced it before. I was always a selfish leader in my 20s and 30s.
The journey from the selfish leader to the servant leader. Thank you so much for sharing that story. And in this space of your transformation that took place while you were in prison, you discovered these elements, made this transformation. You've now moved on and lead your life. You lead in companies and have led in companies for years from a lens of servant leadership. And Brandon, I think what is fascinating about strengths as we're going to transition into diving into Mark's Strengths Finder profile is it does give us the ability to do what Mark did in terms of gaining that self-awareness of what are our assets and our liabilities, because our talents can be our greatest assets and liabilities. Mark is the same human being, and his talents took him to be the selfish leader that he was. And those same underlying talents have taken him forward to become a servant leader. So on their own, these talents can be a powerful force in either direction. So we have to choose wisely.
Mark, as I'm listening to you, because I've seen the movie based on your life, The Informant, starring Matt Damon.
Now that doesn't show the redemption, but that kind of ends in prison. It don't show the last 30 years, but it shows what happened in the case, the selfish leader.
I would love a sequel to that movie with the selfless leader. And I know that maybe that doesn't get picked up because maybe that doesn't have the same gravitas that the producers might want. But you've been living that movie. You've been creating that movie from that time forward. And you're sitting here today with the ability to look back and see this amazing story of redemption. And I just want to call that out because, Matt Damon did his job. He performed. I think the movie did a good job showing the stress. At least he tried to. But to be able to then look back now at the season of life that you've lived and the turn you made just really tells all of us that getting down a wrong path isn't hard to do. Any one of us can wake up and start down there. But making the decision to do what you described, to choose the right path and to stay on that path, despite our human weaknesses and failures, really speaks to the strength of character that it seems God has gifted you with.
Brendan, as we take a look at Mark's Strengths Finder results, any insights based on what you've heard about Mark's backstory? You mentioned the strength of belief, and I know there's a few other ones in there we're going to unpack here in just a moment, but any initial insights that you'd like to share with our listeners?
Yeah, I would. Mark, when we look at a strengths profile, it's really a snapshot in time. It gives us a picture of a person's talent, these recurring patterns of how we think, how we feel, how we behave, that as Gallup in their research tells us they can be productively applied. The same can be said that these talents, because they recur in many cases on their own, they're auto recurring patterns of behavior, they can also be not productively applied, or used in ways that aren't as helpful. And throughout our life, we're often asked, well, can these change? Can the results shift and move? And absolutely they can. Your 30-year-old self, as compared to today who you are, we might see some adjusting, maybe not much. We might still see that, for example, your number 1 is learner, and your number 8 is intellection, and number 9 is input. And these really speak to the study, the learning, the ability to just absorb, analyze information, and apply it for practical purposes. So that probably was who you were, that ability to earn that PhD.
Yeah, I went 8 years of college straight, bachelor's and master's, Ohio State, PhD at Cornell. Then I did a lot after I got my PhD at Cornell in biochemistry. I did a lot of correspondence, online degrees, and I ended up getting like 9 degrees and 6 of them PhD level total over like 40 years of my first 40 years of my life. Just because I love to learn, I did.
And for those of you who might share that pack, learner, intellection, input, we hear that often, Mark. These are people that to just continue to accumulate knowledge, very, very high IQs. And that probably serves you all the way to today, all that you're learning. And then I know in our conversations, hearing about T Factor and what you got going at Coca-Cola and all the work that you're putting your hands to with the 17,000 employees, 102 locations, I imagine you are always, always, always on that frontier of learning. Would that be accurate?
Yes, very much so. Very much so. But definitely a different purpose in my 30s, more pouring into others and watching others grow compared to, I was so self-absorbed in my 30s. So I'd say putting a different purpose to those strengths.
And that's where I'll connect in your number 2 and 3, belief and developer. And sometimes we're asked, can I grow a strength as I get older? And the answer is absolutely. Absolutely. When you were describing your time in prison and helping those men get their GEDs and helping those men learn English and getting degrees, developers love to see progress in others. It is a service-oriented strength. It loves to teach. I imagine you had the ability to develop people when you were younger, potentially it turned back on itself. Now here you are, accepting what came to you, accepting your term, accepting your new opportunity. And it would seem that developer now has marked your career, your life from that point till now of serving others, developing others. Frankly, Mark, it's the most encouraging strength. It loves to build others up. It loves to see them doing well and saying, I believe in you. You can do this. Let's go. Let's keep moving forward. Does that seem to mark who you are today?
Yes, yeah, especially in my 60s. I was 32 when that whole informant thing started, 33 years ago. And I tell you something, I love to see others grow and get promoted and increase their responsibility even more than myself because it's a different season. And I really want to see our future or the next generation move up because I've already seen those positions.
I love it. The belief strength that you have at number two that I mentioned at the front end of the episode, this is the anchor strength. This is the hold. This is where your core values live and it drives your decisions. And I got to tell you that hearing the transition you made to accept what was to come to you, even the decision for 3 years to wear the wire, the decision then when it was time to face the consequences of 8.5 years in prison, Mr. Colson coming to see you, offering you, somewhere in that belief took deep form. And we love to say about belief leaders, we may not all share the same faith system. Some will root deeply into a faith system. Others, it's just their values. Clearly, yours have rooted deep into a very clear system of belief, but it seems now to color everything about your life. That belief strength is your compass, and it sounds like it's Ginger's as well.
Yeah, and I think it was Ginger's 10 years before me.
You know what? I think as I've listened to this conversation and really gotten to hear your story again, Mark, that I think is so fascinating in this season of life where we've gotten to, we know that belief is an underlying driver in terms of that compass, in terms of the values, and developing people and seeing them rise into their potential and then surpassing that and going into that growth zone, right? Where you're stretching just outside of their comfort zone. I think when we take that and we connect that as well to that learner and that input, the transition that may have been made over life was it used to be the learning for the sake of learning, getting those degrees, going through. Now it's learning about others, storing that information about others to develop and grow them. So it went from that accumulation component to that accumulation of the knowledge, the wisdom, the insights, to continuing to do that through the people lens. Is that kind of a representation of what you've seen in your transformation of how those intersection of those strengths have kind of come together to work for you?
Yes, absolutely. And I feel that way. Like I have no aspiration, when I was 32, all I could think about is be the CEO of ADM and was obsessed with that and was part of my downfall. But I feel so blessed to reach the positions that I've had even the last 20 years since prison. I became COO of a cancer research company before I joined Coca-Cola Consolidated. We also integrated faith in that company, had a Christian CEO. Became eventually the COO. I was there about a decade, still on the advisory board today and integrated faith in that company. So I don't have that aspiration to be the next CEO of one of the largest companies in the world. I want to see someone else that I'm pouring into be that position someday. So yeah, I do feel exactly that, Darren, what you're sharing. I want to see others grow and reach their full potential. I've already had those opportunities and, God has blessed me so much, especially with a second chance after everything that happened. I just want to see others grow and reach their potential.
And with your awakening to faith and introducing faith into the companies that you have worked with, bringing a Christian perspective, I think one of the things that is fascinating about Coca-Cola Consolidated, we had in a little bit of our chat pre-show, you hire lots of non-Christians. So it's not that there's this component of you have to be Christian to work in the organizations that you've been a part of. It's actually been far more using those morals, those values, that belief as a compass for how to grow people and how to connect the work that we're doing to purpose and developing people to the best that they can be. Can you speak a little bit to that?
Yeah, we love hiring non-Christians. We have 102 plants. We have a chaplain in every plant. We have over 100 prayer groups. And in Bible studies. I've been on a prayer call not long ago, had 400 people on that. We have a discipleship program we call Radical Mentoring, which is faith-based, one mentor, Christian leader with 8 mentees, and we have dozens of those ongoing. But we love to hire non-Christians, and probably majority of our 17,000 employees are likely not Christians. But we feel like they don't go to church yet, and they're going to be exposed to God in this environment. Even our purpose statement, our official purpose statement, is to honor God in all we do by pursuing excellence, serving others, and growing profitably. But to honor God in all we do, even in our purpose statement. And we tell our employees on onboarding, they don't have to be a Christian to work at Coca-Cola Consolidated, but we have 10 values, and we say these 10 values are non-negotiable. Accountability and morality and being ethical. And we said those are non-negotiable, those 10 values. But you don't have to be a believer to join our company. But they're going to be exposed to God in this environment.
I want to mention, because Mark, you are a bundle of energy. Just sitting across from you on calls and now getting to see you on video, 2 of your strengths, number 4 and 5, are achiever and responsibility. And we like to teach people when we think about what's right with them, because that's the whole purpose of this strengths approach. And as you and I have discussed, since we share the same faith, I like to believe that that's how God looks at us. I like to believe that he looks at us and then he could see these gifts he's given us, and that achiever responsibility. I would bet that that has marked your whole life, just an energy and a passion to accomplish great things. And I'm going to connect it to your number 6, because you have positivity. And people with high positivity, you have contagious enthusiasm. It lives in you, pounds you out of bed in the morning. Talk a little bit about that. Is that energy and that positivity, can you see that thread through life?
I think it has. Even at Cornell, the average age for a PhD student is 32. I was 22. So I was just this, move forward and knew at an early age what I wanted to do. I was the only child out of 4 to go to college in my family. And I went, bachelor's, master's, PhD, 8 years straight, full scholarship for my 8 years of college, academic scholarship. So I was always positive. But I would say in prison in 98, 25 years ago, when I became a man of faith, when I became a Christian, I think it even grew exponentially. Positivity. It did. It became more of a sense of urgency and even more passion and zeal. But I think I've always been a positive person, but I think it grew even exponentially 25 years ago.
That's great. But we'd like to tell our listeners that it's really interesting to track just the way that, as the founder of CliftonStrengths, Dr. Donald Clifton, he would refer to these as our God-given talents. And he would say these God-given talents, they can grow and change and mature and become even more intentional and more effective. And we hear that in you, because he would say that the greatest use of strengths is always coupled with a mission to do good. And what we hear from you today is that mission to do good, to do the good to the people that you're developing, and opening arms, right? So yes, we have these values, but we accept you to come in and learn and grow with us. And so just to mention that to our listeners, that wherever you're at in your journey of growth and development, you have these amazing talents. And you might have even looked at them in the past, but a lot of us take assessments, Mark, and then we put it in the drawer and move on to the next thing. But we think there's something special about just really a person knowing how they were made and then using that on purpose, on mission to serve others. And just really appreciate your story of making that the priority of your life. And it sounds like that's how it's going to roll from here on until it's time to go home.
Yeah, thank you. And I agree. I think I had, as you said, probably those same strengths, God-given strengths. I didn't realize God gave them to me back then. I didn't give God credit for them. I tried to do everything myself, made decisions in isolation, without prayer, without wise counsel around me, and made some bad decisions as a result of that in my 20s and 30s. But I will tell you something, Brandon. I do feel that, as you said, those were strengths like achiever and like responsibility, but they've been magnified, and I've become more intentional about them. And I think I've added more empathy to them, that I think I've been more caring of others, especially kind of starting when I became a Christian at age 40. I think I've added empathy to those where I'm more intentional about it. And I feel more sense of urgency. As you get closer to the end of your life than you are in the beginning, you feel a sense of urgency. And these strengths start magnifying.
They do. The magnifying effect is pretty powerful. And that is right in line with something that I know is near and dear to your heart and has driven you, Mark, over the past several decades now, the T factor, transformation, right? Like that is a part of who you are. That's something that you shared with me that has gone with you now through several seasons of life. And I want to just ask you, for our listeners that are tuning in and taking in your story, how can a leader that's listening here start to think of the big picture through the lens of the transformations that they may need to make at different junctures in their life?
Well, once I got out of prison, I really became so interested in that faith at work, business's mission to have a purpose-driven company. And Coca-Cola Consolidated, we call that T Factor. Coca-Cola Consolidated is the bottling side. It's different than Coca-Cola Atlanta. We're a different company, different CEO, different leadership. And like I said, we have a purpose statement to honor God in all we do by serving others, pursuing excellence, and growing profitably. And T Factor is that. That's the transformation that we do internally in our company. And we also share with others. Each quarter, we'll bring in 350, 400 top leaders virtually, and we'll share how we do that because it's had such an impact on our company. And what we really do when we equip our leaders, we teach them to lead. We call it leads, Leads. And L is for listen. We want them to listen better. We got 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. So we want them to listen well. We have a whole training on leads. It's a lot more detailed than what I'm sharing here. I'm kind of just touching the surface. E is for empathy. We feel that if you care about your employees, they're going to have so much more engaged and you're going to have so much more higher retention rate and lower absenteeism. And then advocate, the A in leads to be advocate, to be the chief cheerleader for that employee, help them grow. Not be a cheerleader for yourself like I was in my 30s. Be a cheerleader for the people that work around you, your peers, your subordinates, your customers, your vendors. Be an advocate for them. D is for develop. Not develop just yourself. We all have to grow and continue to develop, but help the people around you develop. Your subordinates, the people that work for you, your peers, again, your customers, your vendors, help them develop. And then the S is self-reflection, where self-reflection and pray. Think about that on the weekend, what you could have done different, and do it better on Monday. So be intentional, continue to refine and improve. But even just those first two, listen well and empathy, even in our engagement surveys we do every September, the non-Christians will even say, I'm not a Christian, but I love having a supervisor that cares about me, who listens, and they love that environment. And I think that's why our results, why God's blessed our business. We do it for God, but it's also good for business. If the secular companies knew these secrets, they would be doing this.
So it sounds like you're a people development company that just happens to do bottling.
Yes, absolutely. Our vision is to have, and I hear our CEO and chairman, Frank Harrison, say it often, that his vision and our vision of the company is 17,000 servant leaders. Not to have billions of bottles and cans, that comes with it. When you have 17,000 servant leaders, the results are a byproduct.
You know, the principles that you just shared on leads, listen, empathy, advocate, develop self-reflection. You said it very well. These are standards that any organization could adopt to develop an organization filled with leaders who think about serving others first. And so for you who are listening today, you may or may not share Mark's faith. You may or may not be part of a faith-based organization. But what he's saying today, we can tell you from our work at 34 Strong, that when leaders do empathize, they listen, they advocate instead of, and we like to say, Mark, that you're either an advocate, you're an adversary, or you're just ambivalent. And we often talk about be the advocate. Don't have your team member feel like you're on the opposite side against them or that you just don't care, to your point. Operate from that place, because that is where not only will I work hard for you, but I'll grow and I'll learn and I'll contribute to my family and my community, and life outside of work just really blossoms.
Now, Mark, based on the frameworks that are here that you said with leads, with the T factor, sometimes leaders come in. It sounds like this might have even been you in your 30s. Hey, culture, people, that doesn't matter. Just get to the bottom line, give me the profitability and going through. And yet today, you know that is not the way that things work. What has that meant in terms of results, in terms of retention, in terms of turnover, because those things get overlooked. Retention, keeping employees actually lowers the cost of doing business. The cost of turnover is astronomically high. And I think estimates are anywhere between 2 to 4 times or even 5 times of a person's annual wage. It's very expensive. What's that actually meant for Consolidated in terms of engagement, turnover, and retention?
It's paramount. When you look what happened at ADM and then Enron and WorldCom, everything was all about the results. And there wasn't enough about the people, and there wasn't enough being intentional to really care for your people. And so the turnovers became so high. I mean, ADM's doing great now, but now when I'm talking 30 years ago, when it was in the middle of that scandal, and then look what happened to Enron and WorldCom. They imploded, those two companies, because they didn't pour into their people. But the impact it has on us, the retention rates in the beverage industry, God has so blessed us with good retention rates, low absenteeism. And I mentioned that engagement survey we do every September. And our employees talk about how engaged they are and how they love coming to work and how they can bring their whole self to work. They love an environment where it's people first. It's the best way to do business.
It's literally, how can you afford not to do this? That's really what the question shifts from, because a lot of times it's looked at, well, how can we afford to invest in our people? And the real question is, how can we afford not to invest in our people? And in really hard times, it's easy to look at that and feel like the boat is getting broken apart and say, oh, we really can't focus on our people. Consolidated took a completely different approach in the recent COVID pandemic when the times were incredibly tough. Can you speak a little bit to that and how that is translated to actually strengthening your culture in the worst of times for many of your team members and their families?
Yeah, we're always trying to move the needle. We don't want to be a sign on the wall that says to honor God in all we do by serving others, pursuing excellence, growing profit. We want to live it through actions. So we're always looking at ways to be intentional. We started when COVID hit in March of 2020, we started a benevolence fund in the company. And in this benevolence fund, our employees were working overtime. When people were home more, we're the bottling and can side, largest bottler in America. So people home more, they drink more. So people home more, they drink Dasani water, Smart Water, vitamin water, and so on. And our employees are working overtime to keep up with the demand. But that said, a lot of their spouses were working at restaurants or hotels or cinemas or universities that were directly impacted by COVID and lost their job. So with our benevolence fund, we allowed them to apply in a very simple process, and we helped hundreds of employees, hundreds of families keep their finances whole. When the Coke employee's spouse lost their job, and sometimes the spouse was the higher income of the two, that's moving the needle. And that just doesn't reach the several hundred employees that actually received some of those benevolent funds. 17,000 employees observed that. Everyone's impact. They say this company is different.
And Brandon, when you're in a leadership role, you're always being watched. Isn't that right?
Absolutely. And what you do is magnified down to those you lead, and it cascades. And when you cascade the positive message that you're saying, that's what makes its way down. It may have a slight diminishing return, but when you reinforce, we like to say, Mark, and you probably practice this often, repetition equals significance. The more you want something remembered, the more often you say it. And leaders in organizations, we are chief repetition officers. Our job is to keep giving the good news over and over of what we do. And that's how you get 17,000 employees to comment that these people care. They're different. They're thinking different. So we really encourage all of you listening that, what Mark is opening up today, these aren't secrets that can't be shared. These are secrets that he is freely sharing today, that for all of you listening, there are some really powerful pieces here that you can apply into your organization. And so, Mark, we really appreciate what you've opened up today, and for all of our listeners to get to hear what is working so very well at Consolidated.
And you hit the nail on the head, Brandon, when you said significance. When we say 17,000 servant leaders, we want our 17,000 employees living a life of significance, not just a life of success, millions of cans or bottles that comes as a byproduct. But we love that. We want them to live a very purposeful life and a life of significance versus the way the world defines success. Think about it. When I was at ADM, I had everything the world would say that's successful. but I had a void in my heart the size of Grand Canyon. Then I was in prison at $20 a month, helping guys get their GEDs. And I started seeing that difference between a life of significance versus life of success. And it's almost like I became a free man in prison because it was so rewarding, this life of significance. And that's what we want our 17,000 employees to come to work with purpose and to realize the vendors, the customers, the employees around them, we want them to live a life of significance.
Wow, Mark. I'm just blown away. I think Brandon and I could stay on here for hours more chatting with you. And what you just said, becoming a free man in prison, that just sits with me so powerfully. That is where we're going to leave things. Now, Mark, if people want to get in touch with you, learn more about you, about Consolidated, where can they go to do that?
I have a website, www.markwhitacre.com, and Whitacre is Whitacre, but www.markwhitacre.com. It has a contact tab. You click it, and it's got a couple of my email addresses where they can contact me directly.
I just want to thank you so much, Mark, for joining us and sharing your story of truly being a transformed people-first leader. For our listeners out there, are you ready to discover your strengths to accelerate into life like Mark has? We believe this path so much, we're offering our listeners the opportunity to discover their top 5 Clifton strengths. To do so, just email us at Brandon, that's BRANDON, at 34strong.com with the subject line top 5 to request your StrengthsFinder code. So we want to thank you for joining us on this episode of the Strengths Whisperer. What did you take away from the conversation with Mark Whitacre today? We'd love to know. Again, just email us at Brandon at 34strong.com if you're ready to discover your top 5 strengths. Include top 5 in the subject line.